This project is far too sophisticated for a student like you to have created alone. The teacher's voice cut through the hushed science fair, her finger pointing at the complex circuitry displayed beside a 14-year-old black boy. Students shifted uncomfortably as she demanded he admit he'd gotten help. But in the back of the gymnasium, two adults in MIT polo shirts were already standing, moving toward the confrontation with purpose. The boy's name was Jamal Carter, and his project wasn't just advanced, it was groundbreaking. He had spent months alone in his family's garage, teaching himself a level of electrical engineering most students don't encounter until college. But in that moment, his teacher saw only what her bias told her to see. This is the story of how a single moment of public doubt nearly derailed a young genius, and why the system is still failing students like him every single day. Because what happened next would expose a truth about American education that data has confirmed for decades. Jamal's obsession began not in a classroom, but in a salvage yard. At 12, he started collecting discarded electronics from a scrap heap behind his apartment complex. An old laptop motherboard became his first puzzle. A broken microwave yielded a perfectly functional magnetron. While his friends played video games, Jamal taught himself to read circuit diagrams from library books published before he was born. His mother, a nurse working double shifts, would find him asleep at the kitchen table, surrounded by solder and schematics. She saw genius. His middle school science teacher saw a distracted student who daydreamed about machines. This is the reality for countless black students in STEM. Research from the Brookings Institution shows that teachers' implicit biases are directly associated with racial disparities in achievement. These aren't just feelings, they're measurable outcomes. In counties with average levels of teacher bias, black students score over half a standard deviation lower on tests than their white peers. The bias operates in whispers. Who gets called on, whose curiosity is nurtured, whose project is met with a skeptical eye instead of encouragement. For Jamal, high school was supposed to be different. Westwood High had a renowned engineering track, but on his first day of advanced physics, his teacher, Ms. Alina Vance, took one look at his course request form and suggested he consider a more manageable load. It was a subtle redirection, a soft barrier. Studies show black students are 66% less likely to be referred to gifted programs than white students with identical test scores. The gatekeeping starts early. Undeterred, Jamal worked alone. His project for the regional science fair was born from watching his grandmother struggle with arthritis. He envisioned a low-cost, wearable sensor array that could predict oncoming joint inflammation by monitoring subtle electrical changes in muscle tissue. It required a deep understanding of biophysics, microcontroller programming, and signal processing. He sourced parts from online auctions, funded by weekends bagging groceries. For 4 months, the garage was his laboratory. Ms. Vance supervised the science fair entrance. When Jamal submitted his proposal, her feedback was brief. "Ambitious," she wrote. "Ensure you can explain all principles involved." The subtext was clear. "I don't think you built this yourself." Her assumption reflects a documented phenomenon where educators' implicit biases cause them to attribute minority students' work to external help, a form of intellectual disbelief. The day of the fair arrived. The gymnasium buzzed with parents and judges. Jamal stood proudly beside his display, a sleek armband prototype connected to a laptop running visualization software he coded himself. Down the aisle, Ms. Vance was effusively praising a white student's volcano model, a classic 10th grade project. The contrast was a perfect snapshot of the system: predictable achievement rewarded, extraordinary innovation scrutinized. The first judge, a retired engineer, spent 20 minutes at Jamal's table, asking increasingly complex questions. Jamal answered each one, his explanations moving from the sensor's capacitance to the machine learning algorithm filtering the data. The judge's eyes widened. He called over a colleague. Unbeknownst to anyone, 2 recruiters from MIT's Early Action Identification program were also in the room, scouting for talent off the conventional radar. They lingered at the back, observing. Then Ms. Vance approached. She had seen the crowd gathering. Her expression tightened from curiosity to clear suspicion. The public address system echoed through the gym as awards were being prepared elsewhere. In that bubble of attention, she asked the question loud enough for everyone to hear. Jamal, this is incredibly complex. Did you have help with the fabrication? Perhaps a mentor from a university? The air left the space around them. The retired engineer looked stunned. Jamal's face, moments before alight with passion, went carefully blank. This was the stereotype threat made real, the extra cognitive burden of proving you belong, of defending your own intellect. Data shows that 90% of students who leave STEM cite instructor practices as a reason. This was that moment of attrition, happening in real time. He responded quietly, "No, ma'am, I built it all." He began walking her through his engineering notebook, every sketch and calculation. She interrupted. "The coding alone is collegiate level. It's okay to admit you had assistance." Her tone was no longer curious, it was accusatory. It was the culmination of 1,000 microaggressions, now a public spectacle. Students from other projects stopped to watch. A phone camera lifted in the crowd. This is where our hook began. With her declaration that the work was too sophisticated for him, with Jamal's world shrinking to the heat of his own face. But here's what the data says happens next. 40% of black college students switch out of STEM majors, a rate significantly higher than their white peers. Moments like this are why the emotional tax is too high. As Ms. Vance prepared to escalate to suggest a review for academic integrity, the two men in polo shirts finally moved. They had seen enough. They cut through the crowd with a quiet urgency. One placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. The other extended a hand to Ms. Vance, but his eyes were on Jamal's project. He spoke a single, devastating sentence to the teacher. "We've been evaluating this project for the last 30 minutes. Every line of code, every circuit path." He paused, letting the silence gather weight. "This isn't just high school science. This is publishable research." The recruiter then turned fully to Jamal, whose breath was held somewhere in his chest. "Son, what's your name?" The gymnasium was silent. All eyes were on them. Ms. Vance's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The recruiter didn't wait for her. He looked at Jamal and asked the question that would tear the script in half. "Have you ever considered where you want to go to college?" Jamal's voice was barely a whisper when he answered. "MIT, that's the dream." The lead recruiter, Dr. Aris Thorne, didn't smile. He nodded as if confirming a hypothesis. He pulled a leather folder from his bag. Inside was not a brochure, but a formal letter. "We have a discretionary early identification protocol," he said, his voice now carrying to the crowd, "for instances of exceptional, self-driven innovation. This is a provisional offer of admission, with a full undergraduate scholarship, contingent on your graduation." The gymnasium, which had been frozen, erupted into a sound that was neither cheer nor gasp, but a collective release of shock. Ms. Vance took a physical step backward. Her face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and a dawning, horrifying comprehension. She had just publicly questioned the integrity of a student that one of the world's top engineering schools was recruiting on the spot. The power dynamic in the room shattered and reformed in an instant. Dr. Thorne turned to her, his politeness now a weapon. "You're his instructor. Your student has independently developed a novel approach to early inflammatory detection. The sensor calibration method alone shows remarkable insight." He wasn't thanking her. He was auditing her. Every word highlighted what she had failed to see. She stammered, I was ensuring academic rigor." A parent in the crowd muttered, loud enough to hear, "You were ensuring he knew his place." Within minutes, the video was not just on one phone. It was on dozens. The clip was perfect for virality. The dismissive teacher, the stoic boy, the dramatic entrance of institutional validation. By the time Jamal and his mother were sitting in a quiet office with the recruiters, the hashtag #LetJamalLearn was trending. But this was bigger than a single feel-good moment. It was a case study, playing out in real time, of a statistical truth. A Pew Research study found that 62% of Black STEM professionals report experiencing racial discrimination. For Jamal, it happened at 15 in front of everyone. In the office, Dr. Thorne explained the program. It wasn't charity, it was a strategic investment. We lose too much talent at the filter, he told Jamal's mother, Linda. The filters are people, teachers, counselors, algorithms built on biased data. MIT's internal research showed that students like Jamal, discovered outside of elite feeder schools, often outperformed their peers in grit and innovation. They just had to be found before the system discouraged them out of STEM entirely. Meanwhile, the school principal, Dr. Robert Alden, was in damage control. The district superintendent was on the phone. The local news was in the parking lot. Ms. Vance was placed on immediate administrative leave. Her statement, released through the teachers' union, claimed she was adhering to academic integrity protocols and expressed regret for any misunderstanding. It was a non-apology that fueled the fire. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Some defended her, citing the need for rigor. But thousands more shared stories tagged "Me Too But for Science," tales of having their work stolen, disbelieved, or credited to others. The deeper scandal wasn't Ms. Vance's individual bias. It was her ordinariness. She wasn't a cartoon villain. Her personnel file showed she was a 22-year veteran, voted Teacher of the Year in 1999. She had led the Science Fair Committee for a decade. This was the insidious part. Systemic bias is often perpetuated by well-meaning people following standard procedures. Research from the American Educational Research Association shows that when teachers are asked to refer students to gifted programs, Black students are 66% less likely to be nominated than white students with identical files. Ms. Vance was the system, working as designed. Jamal, however, was thrust into a whirlwind he never asked for. He did morning talk shows via satellite from his living room. He was offered a corporate internship by a medical device company. A GoFundMe for his future endeavors raised $80,000 in 2 days, which his mother, Wary, placed in a trust. He became a symbol, and symbols are heavy. In his first interview, when asked about Ms. Vance, he said, "I just want to build things." It was a profound deflection. The emotional labor of forgiving or condemning his teacher was already being demanded of him. Then came the first major pivot. An investigative reporter from the local paper, digging into Westwood High's records, found a pattern. Over the past 5 years, not a single Black student from Westwood had been a finalist in the regional science fair's engineering category, despite Black students making up 30% of the advanced physics classes. The projects that won were consistently in traditional, testable formats: the volcano, the solar system model, the potato battery. Innovative, tech-heavy projects from Black students were either steered toward more achievable goals or, like Jamal's, met with intense skepticism at the school level. The reporter obtained the scoring rubrics from the school's internal fair. Jamal's project had received low marks from Ms. Vance in the category "Demonstrated Personal Contribution." The notes read, "Unclear level of external support. Complexity suggests assistance." This was the smoking gun. The bias wasn't in the public accusation. It was in the private paperwork, the quiet gatekeeping that happens before the public ever sees a thing. This is how the pipeline narrows, not with a slam but with a whisper. The school board called an emergency meeting. Community leaders demanded an audit of the gifted and talented program. Suddenly, Jamal's story was no longer about one boy and one teacher. It was about data. It was about the zip code lottery of educational expectation. A national civil rights nonprofit filed a request for all district communications related to science fair project approvals over the last decade. They were looking for coded language, for the digital paper trail of disbelief. And Ms. Vance, she retreated from public view, but a former student, now a mechanical engineer, came forward with a story. In 2010, she had built a functional robotic arm for the fair. Ms. Vance had insisted her father, an accountant, must have done the welding. The student, heartbroken, switched her project to a diorama of the solar system. She left STEM entirely in college, becoming a graphic designer. She made me feel like a fraud in my own skin, the woman said in an online essay that went viral. I didn't have MIT in the room to save me. This is the multiplier effect of a single moment of bias. The research from the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences is clear. Adverse instructor practices are a primary driver for students leaving STEM. For every Jamal, whose story had a dramatic rescue, there are hundreds who simply disappear from the pipeline, their potential silently invalidated. The pressure reached a breaking point. The school district, fearing a lawsuit, announced a sweeping independent review of its science curriculum and fair judging processes. They invited Dr. Thorne from MIT to consult. The symbolism was brutal. The institution that had validated Jamal was now being asked to audit the institution that had doubted him. The school board president called it a learning opportunity. Parents called it a reckoning. But in the middle of this institutional earthquake, a private email chain was leaked to the reporter. It was between several teachers in the science department, sent the day after the science fair. One line stood out, written by a teacher who was not Ms. Vance. This sets a dangerous precedent. Now every kid with a slick project will cry bias if we ask questions. The sentiment revealed the core fear, not that they were wrong, but that their authority to question was under threat. The system was digging in. And Jamal, he stopped giving interviews. He asked his mother to take down the GoFundMe. He went back to the garage, because while the world fought over what his story meant, he faced a more immediate problem. The prototype worked, but it was fragile. The code was messy. MIT's offer was provisional. They expected him to continue developing the project to submit a final paper. The glare of the spotlight was melting the very thing that had gotten him there, his deep, solitary focus. The machinery of justice and public opinion was grinding forward, but it operated on a different timeline than the engineering problem on his workbench. He was caught between two worlds, the boy in the garage who spoke the language of circuits, and the symbol in the news cycle who was expected to speak the language of social change. The scholarship was a door to a future, but the controversy was a weight on his present. And as the school district's review began, as lawyers started to depose teachers, and as his inbox filled with requests from activists and corporations, Jamal Carter faced a choice no 15-year-old should have to make. Would he use his voice to change the system that failed him, or would he use his hands to build the next thing that could change the world? The two paths were about to collide, because the school district's lawyer made a formal request to interview Jamal to understand his perspective. His mother refused. The lawyer then sent a subpoena. A subpoena, a legal order compelling a minor to testify against his own school district. Linda Carter framed the document on her kitchen table like a declaration of war. Her son was not a witness, he was the victim. The district's move backfired spectacularly. The civil rights nonprofit, already preparing a broader complaint, amended their filing to include allegations of witness intimidation. The story went national. A 15-year-old genius being strong-armed by lawyers became the lead on cable news. The school board's emergency meeting was leaked in full. The recording revealed not contrition but a circling of wagons. The district's attorney argued that Jamal's experience, while unfortunate, was an isolated incident. He warned that acknowledging systemic bias would open the floodgates to litigation from every student who ever received a bad grade. One board member was heard saying, "We can't let one viral video rewrite our policies." They voted to fight the lawsuit. The message was clear. Protecting the institution outweighed protecting the student. This is where the story shifted from a personal injustice to an institutional autopsy. The independent review, led by a former state education commissioner, began its work. But simultaneously, a group of anonymous teachers and administrators started sending documents to the investigating reporter. They were the conscience of the system. The documents were mundane and devastating. Meeting minutes where community fit was cited as a reason to deny a black student entry to an advanced placement class. emails complaining that the rigor of the engineering track was being diluted by new inclusion initiatives. A 5-year-old survey where black students reported feeling invisible in science classes at 3 times the rate of white students. Then came the wait, it gets worse moment. The reporter received a single spreadsheet. It was a master list of every science fair project submitted at Westwood High over the past 8 years, coded by student race and the category of project. The pattern was undeniable. Projects by Black and Hispanic students were overwhelmingly concentrated in biology, earth science, and chemistry, subjects perceived as more accessible. Projects by white and Asian students dominated engineering, robotics, and computer science. The gatekeeping wasn't just at the fair, it was in the steering. Counselors and teachers were unconsciously funneling students into lanes based on perceived ability, and race was the invisible map. Dr. Thorne from MIT, serving as a consultant to the review, saw the spreadsheet. His analysis was blunt. You're not looking at a talent gap, you're looking at an opportunity gap. You have built a track system and are surprised when students stay in their lanes. He presented the board with national data. Black students who have black teachers are 3 times more likely to be assigned to gifted programs. Westwood High had only 2 black teachers in its entire STEM department. The problem wasn't just bias, it was representation. Meanwhile, the personal cost for Jamal mounted. The subpoena was quashed after a furious hearing, but the damage was done. He developed insomnia. The relentless pressure, the engineering problem, the media, the sense that his entire future hinged on a legal battle he didn't start, caused his grades to slip in other subjects. The very system that doubted him was now threatening to undermine the academic standing required for his MIT offer. The irony was cruel. Ms. Vance, from her exile, filed a grievance against the district for wrongful suspension. She claimed she was a scapegoat for a politically correct witch hunt. Her union lawyer gave an interview, arguing that questioning a student's work was a teacher's duty. Would we be having this conversation if the student was white and the teacher was black? He asked, deliberately reframing the issue as reverse discrimination. This ignited a secondary culture war in the comment sections, further muddying the waters. Then the district played its hardest card. In a deposition, the assistant superintendent was asked if the district stood by Ms. Vance's original assessment of Jamal's project. After a long pause, he said, "The district acknowledges the extraordinary outcome with MIT. However, the pedagogical principle of verifying student work remains sound. We cannot in good practice endorse a process where any project, regardless of complexity, is immune from questioning." It was a masterclass in bureaucratic defense, affirming the rule to avoid condemning its biased application. They were defending the right to be suspicious. The backlash was immediate, but so was a quieter, more insidious counterreaction. Donations to the school district's STEM fund dropped. Angry alumni wrote letters. A segment of the community began to argue that the district was being bullied by outside activists and that Jamal's scholarship was a form of political correctness. The narrative that he was a mediocre student who got lucky began to seep into online forums. This is the second-order consequence of calling out bias. The system doesn't just apologize, it often retaliates by undermining the victim's legitimacy. Jamal reached his breaking point in a meeting with Dr. Thorne. They were supposed to be discussing his project's progress. Instead, Jamal put his head in his hands. "I just wanted to stop. I wish I never entered the fair." Dr. Thorne closed his laptop. "They want you to quit," he said, not unkindly. "They want you to be so exhausted by the fight that you walk away. That's how these systems maintain themselves. They outlast your stamina." But then Dr. Thorne revealed something he'd been holding back. MIT's legal department had been monitoring the case, and they had a policy, rarely invoked, regarding adverse actions against admitted candidates. If the district took any official action that jeopardized Jamal's academic standing or mental well-being, MIT could intervene directly. "We don't just admit students," Thorne explained. "We accept a duty to protect their potential. Your spot isn't provisional because of you." It's provisional because of them. This changed the game entirely. The district wasn't just fighting a lawsuit and a teenager. They were now risking a public relations disaster with one of the most prestigious universities in the world. The threat was unstated but clear. MIT could blacklist Westwood High, refuse future recruitment, and publicly sever ties. For a district that touted its college admission stats, this was an existential threat. The Independent Review Committee finished its report. It was 300 pages long. Its conclusion was unambiguous. The district has systemic, institutional practices that create unequal access to advanced STEM opportunities for students of color, rooted in implicit bias and a lack of representative faculty. It listed 14 specific recommendations, from blind project grading to mandatory anti-bias training. The school board received the report in a closed session. They voted to delay its release for 30 days, citing the need for legal review. This was the final betrayal. The truth was in hand and they chose to hide it. The reporter, tipped off by her sources, published the conclusions that same night. The board was caught. The pressure was now unbearable. Major corporate sponsors of the district's robotics program threatened to pull funding. The State Department of Education announced its own investigation. In a last desperate move, the school board chairman asked for a private meeting with Linda Carter and her lawyers. They offered a settlement, a full scholarship fund for black students in STEM, a named award in Jamal's honor, and a public apology. In return, they wanted the lawsuit dropped and Jamal to participate in a joint press conference, portraying the conflict as a misunderstanding that led to positive change. It was a good deal. It would help other kids. It would make the pain meaningful. Linda was inclined to take it. She looked at her exhausted son and saw a way out. But Jamal, who had been silent for so long, finally spoke. He had been reading the 300-page report. He pointed to one line in the recommendations. The district must reform its teacher evaluation system to include metrics on equitable classroom practices. They'll create a scholarship to look good, Jamal said, his voice quiet but firm. But if they don't change how teachers are judged, nothing changes. The next kid won't have MIT in the room. He was no longer just a student or a symbol. He was a strategist. He saw the root of the machine. He turned down the settlement. The gamble was staggering. He was choosing the uncertainty of a trial over guaranteed incremental reform. He was betting his own peace of mind on the chance to force a deeper, structural fix. His lawyer warned him that courts are unpredictable. The district could win. The MIT offer could be rescinded amid the chaos. Everything could be lost. Jamal looked at the prototype on his workbench, the fragile array of sensors that had started it all. He had built it to solve a physical problem, predicting pain. Now he was trying to solve a systemic one. The tools were different, but the principle was the same. Identify the signal in the noise. The real signal wasn't his hurt feelings. It was the data pattern of denied opportunity. He gave his legal team one instruction: focus the case on the teacher evaluation system. Make the district change how it measures success. The trial date was set. The district, out of options, prepared for a fight it no longer believed it could win. On the eve of the proceedings, the superintendent resigned. The acting superintendent called Linda Carter. He had one final question, a Hail Mary pass to avoid a courtroom. He asked, what would it take for your son to feel justice was served? Justice wasn't an apology. Jamal told the acting superintendent it was a new rule book. He laid out his terms, crafted with his lawyers and Dr. Thorne. The district would implement every one of the independent review's 14 recommendations, but with a crucial amendment. Teacher performance evaluations and bonuses would be tied directly to equitable outcomes. The number of Black and Hispanic students in advanced STEM tracks, their project diversity, their referral rates to national competitions, these would become measurable metrics. What gets measured gets managed. The district, facing a televised trial it knew it would lose, agreed. They signed a binding 5-year consent decree, overseen by a court-appointed monitor. The press conference was not a victory lap, but a sober rollout of policy. The superintendent announced the Pathways Initiative, a complete overhaul of the district's STEM program. The first step was the immediate hiring of 3 new, diverse STEM faculty members, with a goal of mirroring the student demographic within 3 years. For Ms. Vance, the resolution was personal and painful. She opted for early retirement. In a private letter delivered to Jamal's home, she wrote, "I was trained to look for cheating, not for genius where I didn't expect it. I failed you, and I am sorry." She did not ask for forgiveness. Jamal never made the letter public. He understood that her journey was separate from his. Her change of heart was her own burden to carry. The system had shaped her expectations, and now the system, partly because of him, was being forced to change them. Jamal's provisional offer from MIT was finalized. The media storm gradually calved into smaller, quieter stories. He spent the summer before his senior year not as a symbol, but as a student, in a selective virtual incubator program sponsored by the same medical device company that had first shown interest. He refined his prototype, turning it into a robust, wearable device. He filed a provisional patent, with his mother and Dr. Thorne guiding him through the process. The true test came the following spring at the next regional science fair. The new blind judging protocols were in effect. Projects were submitted by number, not name. A record number of Black and Hispanic students from Westwood High entered projects in engineering and computer science. One won the top prize in robotics. The local newspaper ran a photo of the winner, a Black girl holding her autonomous drone, with a headline that read, "The pipeline is open." But the story wasn't over. The National Civil Rights Organization used the Westwood Consent Decree as a model. They launched a campaign targeting 5 other school districts with similar demographic disparities, armed with the data and legal framework perfected in Jamal's case. His fight had created a blueprint. This is how systemic change propagates. One crack in the dam creates the pressure pattern for the next. Jamal graduated as valedictorian. His speech did not mention the controversy. It was about the beauty of solving problems for people you love, referencing his grandmother's arthritis. He thanked his mother, his mentors, and the teachers who finally saw me. The line was gracious and pointed, a masterclass in subtlety. He then walked off the stage and into a summer internship at MIT's Media Lab. The final surprising detail emerged a year later. A major tech publication profiling young innovators visited Jamal in his MIT dorm. On his desk next to his latest hardware project was a framed photograph. It wasn't of the science fair or of him with the MIT recruiters. It was a picture of his old garage workbench, cluttered and chaotic. When asked why, he said, "That's where I learned to trust my own hands. Everything after that was just noise. Some of it was terrible noise. But the work was always the point." The Legal Monitor's first annual report on the Westwood District showed progress. A 40% increase in Black student enrollment in AP Computer Science, a new teacher mentorship program pairing veteran and new hires to combat bias, and the first student-led audit of the library's STEM literature for diversity. The change was measurable, just as Jamal insisted. Ms. Vance, in her retirement, began volunteering with a nonprofit that provides science kits to under-resourced elementary schools. She never gave a public interview about Jamal again. Her atonement, it seemed, was to be quiet and to be useful elsewhere, ensuring other children might have a different first encounter with science. The lawsuit was officially closed. The district had paid the legal fees and a modest settlement that Jamal put into a college fund for his younger cousins. He had refused a larger sum. It was never about the money, he told his lawyer. It was about the rule. In his sophomore year at MIT, Jamal Carter co-founded a nonprofit called Signal Boost. It provides grants, mentorship, and prototype funding to high school students from overlooked backgrounds working on STEM projects. The application requires a video of the student explaining their work, and a teacher's recommendation is optional. The first grant went to a girl in rural Iowa building a water purification system using recycled plastics. The cycle had begun anew. The gymnasium where it all started now hosts an annual innovation symposium run by students for students. The portrait hanging in the front hallway is not of a former principal or star athlete. It's of Jamal Carter, age 15, standing next to his sensor project. The caption reads, "Curiosity deserves faith." The narrative that began with a public accusation of fraud ends with a legacy of institutional reform. The teacher who doubted and the system that supported her doubt were both forced to change. The boy who just wanted to build things built something far larger than a sensor. He built a precedent. He proved that validation can come from within, but that justice sometimes requires changing the world around you to recognize it. The final lesson was this: genius is not rare, but the faith to recognize it in unexpected places often is. The work continues. So, what does Jamal Carter's story actually prove? It proves that the data was right all along. That teacher bias is not a feeling, but a measurable force that alters life trajectories. The research from institutions like Brookings and the National Academy of Sciences gave us the numbers. Jamal's story gave those numbers a face, a name, and a consequence. His case became a rare, documented instance where the hidden curriculum of doubt was interrupted in real time, and where the cost of that bias was tallied up and presented to the very system that created it. But here is the crucial, uncomfortable truth. For every Jamal, with his dramatic rescue and clear-cut victory, there are thousands of students whose genius is quietly invalidated without a witness. They are the 40% of black students who leave STEM majors. They are the 66% less likely to be referred to gifted programs. Their projects are steered toward safer topics. Their curiosity is met with skepticism instead of wonder. They internalize the doubt until it becomes their own, and they walk away. The system counts on attrition. It is built on the assumption that most will not fight back. Jamal's victory was not that he was exceptional. His victory was that he proved the system could be forced to see his exceptionalism. The real innovation wasn't the censor. It was the legal and public pressure that turned subjective bias into a quantifiable, actionable policy failure. He moved the needle from "is this student credible?" to "is this system equitable?" That is the permanent shift. The work is never done. Changing a policy is one thing. Changing a culture is a generational project. The new teacher evaluations at Westwood High are a start. The increased enrollment is a start. But the research tells us that representation is the true catalyst. Black students thrive with black teachers. Diverse perspectives in the classroom shatter monolithic expectations. The solution isn't just training teachers to see bias, it's hearing teachers who have lived outside of it. Jamal Carter is now at MIT building the next thing. The teacher who doubted him is retired, volunteering. The school district is under a consent decree being monitored. This is where most stories would end, with a neat resolution. But the documentary doesn't end because the pattern hasn't ended. It repeats in a different school, a different lab, a different boardroom every single day. The question Jamal's story leaves us with is this: who is in the room? When the next young mind is being questioned, who is there to advocate? Is it a recruiter from a prestigious university? Is it a lawyer? Or is it a teacher, already trained and incentivized to see potential instead of a problem? We have the data. We have the blueprint. What we need is the will to apply it everywhere, not just in the districts that get caught. Genius is not a rarity. It is distributed equally across every zip code, every background. Our failure is in distribution of faith. If you found this deep dive into the systems that shape opportunity compelling, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's story examines another invisible architecture: the algorithm deciding who gets a loan, who gets a job interview, and who gets left behind. It's another world hidden in plain sight, and you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.